Alarmingly, since 2020, we have dramatically accelerated every single stage of this perilous pattern. Unprecedented quantities of money have been printed. Debt has surged faster than ever before. Military commitments have been extended yet further. Remaining productive capacity has been hollowed out, and society itself has fractured beyond easy recognition. We are no longer merely walking down this treacherous path. We are sprinting relentlessly towards the cliff edge, and the impending drop is horrifyingly clear to anyone who comprehends the pattern. Perhaps, against all odds, we will somehow discover a viable escape route. Perhaps America can achieve what Spain, Britain, and the Soviet Union demonstrably could not. Perhaps we will yet implement fundamental, courageous reforms, painstakingly rebuild our vital industrial base, and restore genuine fiscal sanity. Perhaps, just perhaps, this time genuinely is different. But the compelling historical pattern suggests otherwise. The irrefutable mathematics dictate otherwise. And history itself, which has borne witness to empires dying in precisely the same manner repeatedly for 5 centuries, unequivocally states that we are on the verge of learning this harsh lesson in the most brutal way imaginable. If this incisive analysis has illuminated our actual position within this collapse sequence, then I urge you to subscribe immediately. For when we inevitably confront stages 6 and 7, you will undoubtedly wish to grasp precisely what transpired and why. The answers are not obscurely hidden in some uncertain future. They are vividly inscribed within the past 500 years of recorded history. The pattern does not deceive. And right now, that pattern grimly warns that America's time is running out, far faster than anyone truly wishes to admit. They were, without exception, wrong every single time. We are, tragically, propagating the exact same self-deceptive falsehoods right now. We tell ourselves we are different because we possess advanced technology. We assert our uniqueness because we wield the dollar. We declare ourselves exceptional simply because we're America. Yet, this relentless historical pattern remains utterly indifferent to notions of exceptionalism or flattering self-image. The pattern, fundamentally, is pure, unyielding mathematics. One cannot indefinitely spend beyond one's productive capacity. One cannot possibly maintain a sprawling global empire without a robust economic foundation. One cannot systematically debase one's national currency without inevitably confronting dire consequences. And crucially, one cannot simply bypass stage 6 and stage 7. Once stages 1 through 5 have been completed, the entire destructive sequence becomes irrevocably locked in by immutable economic laws. The only remaining variable, then, is timing. Perhaps we have a decade remaining before this collapse. Perhaps 5 years. Perhaps even less. But the pattern, with its cold, undeniable logic, declares that collapse is not merely approaching, but is unequivocally inevitable. And when it finally arrives, it will not be a gradual decline. It will be sudden, and it will be utterly shocking. A catastrophic currency crisis will inexorably trigger a debilitating debt crisis, which in turn will precipitate a profound political crisis. Virtually overnight, the once mighty superpower will be relegated to a mere cautionary tale. Its reserve currency will be reduced to a regional curiosity. Its empire will become nothing more than a fading memory. 3 times this cataclysm has occurred before. Following this precise, devastating pattern, the mathematics unequivocally state that we are next in line. This critical juncture is marked by former allies actively diversifying their reserves away from the dollar, by international trade steadily migrating to alternative currencies, and by a deluge of dollars flooding back to our shores because there is no longer a compelling global need to hold them. And disturbingly, we are already witnessing these early warning signs. The BRICS nations are actively developing robust dollar alternatives. Central banks across the globe are acquiring gold at unprecedented rates. China and Russia are increasingly settling their trade directly in yuan and rubles. Even Saudi Arabia has begun accepting yuan for its vital oil sales. The fissures in the dollar's dominance are forming visibly before our very eyes. Stage 7 is complete collapse, not a gradual, gracefully managed decline, but rather a sudden, catastrophic implosion. The Soviet Union transitioned from global superpower to complete non-existence in a mere 900 days. Britain lost its entire vast empire within 2 decades. Spain's decline was more protracted, yet the ultimate outcome was identical. When a reserve currency fails, when national debt becomes mathematically unserviceable, when the military can no longer be adequately funded, an empire does not simply fade away gracefully over generations. It collapses rapidly and brutally. And every individual who once harbored the complacent belief that it can't happen here will inevitably learn the same harsh lesson that every fallen empire eventually learns. It can happen anywhere. And tragically, it always does. 3 powerful empires, Spain, Britain, and the USSR, meticulously followed this precise pattern to their undoing. Each, in its turn, harbored the fervent belief that it was inherently exceptional and fundamentally different. Each was convinced it had unearthed the secret to permanent, unassailable power. And each believed, with dangerous hubris, that the immutable rules of history simply did not apply to them. Consequently, we are now entirely dependent on foreign supply chains for essential pharmaceuticals, crucial electronics, foundational steel, and even critical military components. Much like Spain before us, we have become utterly reliant on imports. When the flow of money inevitably ceases, we will confront an inescapable collapse. Check. Stage 5. Social decay. Public trust in core institutions has plummeted to the lowest levels ever recorded. Violent crime is demonstrably escalating in major cities. Homelessness has surged dramatically to crisis proportions. Tragic drug overdoses now claim the lives of over 100,000 Americans each year. The nation's best and brightest minds are either actively seeking opportunities abroad or are mentally disengaging from the societal fabric. Fertility rates have collapsed well below replacement levels, portending future demographic challenges. Political dysfunction is both total and complete. We appear incapable of agreeing on any issue, unable to effectively address pressing problems, and seemingly unable to construct anything without enduring decades of frustrating delays. The overt signs of decay are unequivocally omnipresent. Yet, a pervasive delusion persists, where everyone maintains the pretense that everything is fine. It is demonstrably not fine. Check. We currently find ourselves at stage 5 of this 7-stage sequence. The Soviet Union reached stage 5 immediately prior to its total collapse, as did Britain. Spain, while enduring somewhat longer, nonetheless adhered to the identical sequence. We have not yet reached the definitive end, but we are unequivocally deep within the established pattern, with an alarmingly limited time frame remaining. Stage 6 is the perilous loss of reserve currency status. Consequently, the dollar has hemorrhaged 98% of its purchasing power since 1971. While we may not be physically adulterating silver coins with cheap copper, as Spain did, we are, in essence, electronically generating an unlimited supply of paper currency. The mechanism employed may differ, but the devastating result is precisely identical. Systematic currency debasement. Check. Stage 3. The debt spiral. The United States currently labors under a colossal total debt of $39 trillion. This staggering figure represents 128% of its GDP and is steadily climbing. Interest payments alone are now rapidly approaching $1.2 trillion per annum and show no sign of abating. Shockingly, we are now spending more on merely servicing this debt than on our entire national defense budget. We incur multi-trillion-dollar deficits every single year, with an anticipated $2.3 trillion deficit projected for 2024. This is occurring during a period of ostensible economic growth and, theoretically, peacetime. We are, quite literally, borrowing new money simply to pay the interest on money we previously borrowed, the textbook definition of a debt spiral. Spain defaulted 4 times. Britain borrowed relentlessly until its economic fabric unraveled. The USSR simply ran out of money entirely. We are, undeniably, following precisely the same perilous trajectory. Check. Stage 4. Loss of productive capacity. America, to its detriment, no longer predominantly manufactures physical goods. While we excel in product design, the provision of financial services and consumption, the fundamental act of production has been largely abandoned. Our once robust manufacturing base has been systematically dismantled and relocated to nations such as China, Mexico, Vietnam, and Bangladesh. We consistently import upwards of $800 billion more than we export annually, creating an enormous trade imbalance. A superpower possessing over 30,000 nuclear warheads had collapsed purely from internal economic failure. The devastating seven-stage pattern had, once again, played out with chilling perfection: military overextension, currency failure, debt spiral, loss of empire, culminating in total collapse. And here lies the stark, terrifying truth that every American must confront. The United States is, with chilling fidelity, following this exact same pattern, stage by meticulously identical stage. Stage 1. Military overextension. The United States currently maintains a colossal network of over 750 permanent military bases, strategically located in more than 80 sovereign nations. We have active military personnel deployed in 150 countries, committed to defending Europe through NATO, safeguarding Japan, South Korea, and Australia, prosecuting ongoing operations in the volatile Middle East, and actively countering China's burgeoning expansionism and Russia's persistent aggression. Our annual military budget comfortably exceeds $850 billion, a sum greater than that of the next 10 countries combined. Yet, astonishingly, it remains insufficient. We are stretched impossibly thin, vital equipment is aging at a rate far exceeding its replacement, and military recruitment figures are significantly declining. We possess an array of defense commitments that are simply impossible to fulfill simultaneously. We are, without doubt, overextended, precisely like Spain, Britain, and the USSR before us. Check. Stage 2. Currency debasement. In 1971, President Nixon definitively closed the gold window, severing the dollar's last tangible link to a commodity. The dollar thereby transformed into a pure fiat currency, devoid of any precious metal backing. Since the turn of the millennium, the money supply has expanded by a staggering 400%. Since 2020 alone, we have electronically printed in excess of $6 trillion in new currency. The reasons were self-evident. Centralized planning stifles economic efficiency, innovation withers and dies under total state control, and the impetus for producing quality goods vanishes when there is no personal incentive or reward. Stage 3. Currency collapse. The ruble, in truth, never attained the status of a genuinely internationally accepted currency. It could not be freely exchanged in foreign markets, and even Soviet citizens themselves harbored a profound distrust of their own tender, opting to use US dollars whenever they could possibly acquire them. The government was thus forced to procure essential foreign goods by expending its precious gold reserves and oil exports, simply because no other nation was willing to accept rubles. By 1985, global oil prices had plummeted significantly, and Soviet gold reserves were rapidly depleting. The brutal reality was that they were fast running out of actual, usable money. Stage 4. Loss of empire. In the pivotal year of 1989, the Berlin Wall famously fell. Within a single year, the entirety of Eastern Europe decisively departed from the Soviet sphere of influence. Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Romania, and East Germany, all were gone. The satellite states that had previously afforded the Soviet Union vital strategic depth and crucial buffer zones simply evaporated. The Soviet government found itself utterly powerless to stem this tide. They were, quite simply, financially bankrupt. Stage 5. Complete collapse. On December 26, 1991, the Soviet Union formally ceased to exist as a political entity. A mere 900 days had elapsed from the fall of the Berlin Wall to its complete dissolution. There was no foreign invasion, no nuclear war, simply a total, catastrophic economic implosion. The military could no longer be paid, the government became utterly dysfunctional, and the ruble plummeted to absolute worthlessness. They genuinely believed that communism would inevitably enter capitalism and that the Soviet model was destined to dominate the 21st century. For 45 years, they engaged in direct, intense competition with the United States, meticulously matching its military might, constructing more tanks, more missiles, and deploying more troops. Yet, beneath the veneer of propaganda and outward displays of strength, their underlying economy was slowly but irrevocably dying. Stage 1. Military overextension. The Soviet Union consistently allocated between 15% and 20% of its total GDP to military expenditures, a staggering figure that was triple the percentage spent by America. They felt compelled to meticulously match American technology, global reach, and extensive alliance systems. Yet, their underlying economy was but a small fraction of America's colossal size. They were actively engaged in a protracted conflict in Afghanistan, financially propping up Cuba and providing substantial support to regimes in Syria, Vietnam, North Korea, Angola, and Ethiopia. Indeed, wherever America exerted influence, the Soviets felt an imperative to establish a counter-presence. This colossal expenditure proved utterly unsustainable. Stage 2. Economic stagnation. The Soviet economy, fundamentally, ceased to grow in the 1970s. While oil export revenues provided a lifeline, keeping the system barely afloat, virtually nothing else functioned properly. State-run factories churned out goods of notoriously low quality. Collective farms consistently failed to meet their production quotas. Soviet technology lagged decades behind that of the West. By the 1980s, the Soviet Union, a nation possessing some of the most fertile farmland on the entire planet, was paradoxically forced to import grain from America, unable to feed its own populace. The war had been won, certainly, but the empire was, quite simply, financially finished. They possessed neither the military capacity nor the economic means to defend or maintain it, let alone project power on a global scale. Stage 4. Loss of empire. In 1947, Britain was compelled to relinquish control of India, the jewel in the crown that had served as an unparalleled source of immense wealth for 2 centuries. It was gone. Over the subsequent 2 decades, they proceeded to lose virtually every remaining possession, all of Africa, the Middle East, Southeast Asia, and the Caribbean. By 1970, the once unrivaled British Empire existed solely within the pages of history books and the wistful embrace of nostalgic memories. Stage 5. Currency collapse. The pound sterling continued its relentless depreciation year after year. In 1940, 1 pound commanded $4.03 in U.S. currency. By 1950, it had fallen to $2.80. By 1970, $2.40, and by 1980, a mere $2. The former global reserve currency had been reduced to nothing more than a regional one. Britain desperately endeavored to maintain the outward semblance of a great power, clinging to its permanent seat on the UN Security Council, its nuclear weapons, and its special relationship with America. Yet, the truth was universally acknowledged. They were a former power, a living museum of bygone greatness. The empire had vanished forever, never to return. Now, we turn our attention to the most recent and poignant example, the Soviet Union, spanning the period from 1945 to 1991. Following the conclusion of World War II, the USSR emerged as one of 2 formidable global superpowers. Boasting thousands of nuclear weapons, the most potent military on Earth, ironclad control over Eastern Europe, and an array of satellites orbiting in space, the Soviets were utterly convinced that they embodied the future. They foolishly believed they could subsequently rebuild their shattered finances. They were catastrophically mistaken. Stage 2. Currency debasement. The pound sterling was, by long-standing convention, meant to be backed by gold reserves at a fixed, immutable rate. However, the exigencies of war had utterly drained Britain's gold reserves. Vast quantities of gold had been shipped across the Atlantic to America to procure essential weapons, foodstuffs, and supplies. By 1920, Britain's gold reserves had dwindled to half their 1914 levels, yet, in a misguided effort, they attempted to maintain the pound's pre-war value. In 1925, they formally returned to the gold standard at the exact pre-war exchange rate. The inherent problem was immediately apparent to astute economists. The pound was severely overvalued at this rate. Consequently, British exports became prohibitively expensive for international buyers. Manufacturing output experienced a precipitous decline, unemployment soared to crisis levels, and the government was compelled to maintain punishingly high interest rates simply to defend the currency's artificially inflated value. This self-defeating strategy utterly crippled the domestic economy. By 1931, the situation became unsustainable. Britain was forced to abandon the gold standard completely. In the currency markets, the pound instantaneously lost 25% of its value overnight. The world's erstwhile global reserve currency had just publicly conceded its inability to honor its fundamental promises. Stage 3. The debt spiral. Britain never truly recovered from the crushing debt incurred during World War I. Then, catastrophically, World War II erupted in 1939, imposing an additional $120 billion in costs by 1945. This necessitated further massive borrowing, primarily from the United States and Canada. By 1945, Britain's liabilities to the United States and Canada exceeded $30 billion, a sum greater than Britain's entire annual GDP. At its zenith, around 1900, Britain commanded approximately 25% of Earth's landmass and governed in excess of 400 million subjects. The pound sterling stood as the unchallenged global reserve currency. Virtually every significant international trade contract was meticulously denominated in British pounds, and central banks across the world invariably held British government bonds as their primary reserves. London was, without question, the financial epicenter of the entire planet. And, much like Spain 3 centuries prior, the British harbored an absolute conviction that their dominance was both permanent and an immutable natural order. Yet, even then, they were already well advanced in faithfully tracing the destructive pattern towards their own inevitable collapse. Stage 1. Military overextension. By the turn of the 20th century, Britain maintained critical military commitments and garrisons on every single inhabited continent: India, Africa, the Middle East, China, the Pacific Islands, and the Caribbean. They were thus compelled to actively defend territories spanning 6 continents simultaneously. The financial burden was astronomically high, even during periods of relative peace. When World War I tragically erupted in 1914, Britain was confronted with an existential dilemma: remain neutral and witness Europe's self-destruction, or plunge into the conflict, risking the potential bankruptcy of the empire to secure victory. They chose to fight. World War I ultimately cost Britain in excess of $40 billion by 1918, a sum that equates to over $1 trillion in contemporary money. They borrowed extensively from every available lender, primarily from the burgeoning United States. By 1918, Britain, once the world's preeminent creditor, owed America billions. The global creditor had, remarkably, transformed into the global debtor. Despite this, they had won the war, and they had, for the moment, retained their empire. By 1600, Spain was producing almost nothing of intrinsic value. They had become entirely dependent on imports and, critically, completely reliant on the continuous influx of silver production. Thus, when the American silver mines inevitably began to deplete and production figures started to dwindle, the entire, fragile economic system predictably collapsed. Stage 5. Social decay and brain drain. As the economy spiraled into catastrophic failure, crime rates across Spanish cities erupted dramatically. The thoroughfares of Madrid and Seville became choked with beggars. Productive, skilled, and talented citizens began to emigrate in significant waves. The nation's brightest minds departed for more dynamic countries such as France, England, and the Netherlands, nations that were actively engaged in genuine construction, wealth creation, and robust economic growth. Spain was left with a bloated economy dominated by bureaucrats, soldiers, and clergy, a society where virtually no one was creating real wealth and almost everyone was consuming it. By 1640, Spain had lost its grip on Portugal. A decade later, by 1650, they had ceded control of the Netherlands, their most lucrative territory. By 1700, the once mighty Spanish Empire had become a hollow shell, still geographically expansive on maps, but fundamentally economically dead at its core. In less than a single century, it had regressed from a global superpower to a mere regional secondary power, a position from which it would never again recover its imperial stature. Modern Spain remains a delightful European nation, culturally rich and historically significant, yet it is utterly irrelevant in the grand calculus of global power. The very descendants of the conquistadors now primarily manage a thriving tourist economy. This, then, is the stark real-world manifestation of imperial collapse. Now let us advance 3 centuries, to Britain in the early 1900s, the fabled empire on which the sun never set. They completely defaulted, painstakingly restructured their obligations, only to immediately resume their pattern of excessive borrowing and spending. This pattern was repeated with declarations of bankruptcy again in 1560, once more in 1575, and a final time in 1596. A staggering 4 complete sovereign defaults within a mere 40 years. Following each bankruptcy, solemn pledges of fundamental reforms were issued. Yet, after every such promise, they invariably reverted directly to the very same destructive pattern of relentless borrowing and profligate overspending. Stage 4. Loss of productive capacity. This particular stage highlights a critical aspect of Spain's collapse that most people profoundly misunderstand. Despite controlling virtually all the gold and silver in the known world, this very abundance, paradoxically, utterly destroyed them economically. The insidious logic dictates that when a nation gains access to what appears to be an unlimited supply of money, it loses the incentive to produce tangible goods. Why undertake the arduous task of growing food domestically when it can simply be imported? Why invest in building ships when they can readily be purchased from other nations? Why foster manufacturing innovation when finished goods are easily acquired through trade? The Spanish nobility, deeply entrenched in their aristocratic ethos, considered productive labor beneath their esteemed station and dignity. Consequently, manufacturing output steadily declined year after year, and agricultural production stagnated. All the immense wealth in precious metals flowing in from the Americas simply flowed straight back out, immediately financing French wine, exquisite Italian textiles, and sophisticated Dutch manufactured goods. Spain, in essence, transformed into nothing more than an elaborate financial pipeline. Wealth passed through Spanish hands, but none of it genuinely remained within Spain itself. Its forces were deployed against the formidable Ottoman Empire across the Mediterranean, locked in a struggle with France for supremacy in Italy, battling Protestant Dutch rebels in the Netherlands, confronting the burgeoning English navy, engaging in military campaigns as far afield as the Philippines, and conducting continuous conquest operations throughout the Americas. By 1580, Spain was maintaining active military commitments across an astounding 4 continents. The financial burden proved absolutely staggering. More than half of all Spanish government revenue was funneled directly into military spending, yet even this monumental allocation proved insufficient to cover the incessant expenses. Stage 2. Currency debasement. The Spanish crown, finding itself unable to meet its vast obligations through taxation alone, no matter how drastically taxes were increased, resorted to the desperate measure invariably adopted by every failing empire, currency debasement. They initiated the practice of mixing cheap copper into their once pure silver coins. A coin that ought to have comprised 100% silver progressively became 50% copper, then 75% copper, eventually reaching 90% copper. While the face value stamped upon the coin deceptively remained constant, its actual intrinsic metal value plummeted precipitously. By 1600, many Spanish silver coins contained virtually no silver whatsoever. Merchants across Europe, acutely aware of this deception, ceased to accept them at their official face value. Predictably, rampant inflation subsequently exploded throughout the Spanish economy. Stage 3. The debt spiral. Spain embarked on a relentless and colossal borrowing spree, securing massive loans from influential Italian banking houses, German financiers, and indeed, from anyone prepared to lend. By 1557, a mere 2 decades into Philip's reign, Spain was forced to declare sovereign bankruptcy on its immense debts. Our journey begins with Spain, which emerged as the world's very first truly global empire, dominating the period from the 16th to the 18th centuries. Its trajectory represents the original blueprint, a path to destruction that every subsequent empire has, tragically, faithfully emulated. Following Columbus's landfall in the Americas in 1492, Spain underwent a profound transformation, evolving into the planet's inaugural superpower. Through conquest, they subdued the magnificent Aztec and Inca civilizations, seizing access to the richest gold and silver deposits ever unearthed by Europeans. By the 1550s, Spanish treasure fleets were routinely transporting an astonishing 200 tons of silver back to Spain each year, a figure that would surge past 400 tons annually by 1600. Spain, in essence, wielded control over Europe's entire money supply. The Spanish real rapidly ascended to become the world's undisputed reserve currency, with every merchant across the globe coveting Spanish silver. And it is precisely at this juncture that the destructive pattern invariably commences, with a nation controlling the epicenter of global money flows and, crucially, harboring the hubristic belief that this singular advantage renders them eternally invincible. King Philip II, whose reign spanned from 1556 to 1598, commanded a personal fortune unparalleled by any monarch of his era. Yet, he relentlessly expended every last ounce of this vast wealth in a relentless effort to sustain and expand his sprawling empire. Stage 1. Military overextension. Spain found itself embroiled in simultaneous conflicts across the entire known world. Capital is being systematically misallocated on a monumental scale. Once thriving productive industries begin to wane and perish. The most gifted individuals, seeking more promising prospects, start to emigrate in significant numbers. International trading partners actively begin to seek alternatives to your established system. Your coveted reserve currency status slowly but surely erodes, and then, quite suddenly, all the perceived advantages that once underpinned your dominance mutate into critical, debilitating vulnerabilities. Your currency, once universally coveted, now begins to flood back to your own shores, no longer eagerly sought after. Your military, once a formidable global presence, now spread perilously thin across the entire planet, becomes prohibitively expensive to maintain. Your pledges, once unequivocally guaranteed by overwhelming strength, now ring hollow, mere rhetoric that the international community increasingly disregards. Let it be unequivocally clear, this is neither mere speculation nor untested theory. This is the precise sequence of events that utterly destroyed Spain, Britain, and the Soviet Union. Their demise was inevitable because they made the exact same catastrophic decisions that America is demonstrably making right now, in the year 2025. They harbored the fatal belief that their dominance was both permanent and irreversible. They dangerously overextended their military far beyond sustainable operational limits. They systematically debased their national currency in a desperate bid to cover their spiraling expenses. And, critically, they stubbornly refused to acknowledge the grim reality until the process of collapse had already become utterly irreversible. Allow me to illustrate precisely how this devastating scenario unfolded on 3 separate occasions, each time following an identical, deeply unsettling playbook. 3 distinct times, 3 global powers, 3 absolute collapses, each meticulously following an identical, devastating 7-stage pattern. And here lies the truly chilling revelation, one that ought to send shivers down your spine. The United States, alarmingly, has already traversed 5 of these 7 critical stages. We aren't merely approaching the danger zone, we are unequivocally deep within it. This, then, is the stark, unvarnished chronicle of how empires truly perish, why their demise invariably catches them unawares, and why, according to the undeniable figures, we are unequivocally next on this perilous list. Moreover, this current trajectory appears to be accelerating at an unprecedented pace, far swifter than any previous collapse recorded in history. Before we meticulously deconstruct this pattern stage by stage, it's crucial to grasp what imperial collapse truly signifies in practice, beyond mere theoretical musings. What precisely does it entail when a superpower disintegrates in real time? Imperial collapse is rarely heralded by foreign invasion or a decisive battlefield defeat. Instead, its insidious onset is marked by a pervasive economic exhaustion and an unsustainable level of imperial overreach. The empire, in its hubris, extends itself far beyond its fundamental capacity for self-sustenance. This manifests as sprawling military installations in over 150 nations, active military engagements on multiple fronts, a litany of promises it is mathematically impossible to honor, and a mountain of debts it can no longer realistically repay. Initially, this decline remains largely imperceptible to most observers. The national currency continues its daily function, the military still claims victories on the battlefield, and politicians persist in articulating grandiose assurances. Yet, beneath this reassuring surface veneer of strength, the very foundations of the empire are quietly, but irrevocably, fracturing. A recurring historical pattern has, for the past 5 centuries, inexorably undermined every global superpower. Astonishingly, as we approach 2025, the United States appears to be treading precisely the same destructive path, replicating the errors of its predecessors with unnerving precision. It's almost as if history is caught in a relentless, self-repeating loop, yet no one seems to have paid heed to the catastrophic conclusions of the preceding acts. By the close of the 16th century, the formidable Spanish Empire held sway over an astonishing half of the world's discovered precious metals. Its legions were virtually invincible across the European continent, and the Spanish currency, the real, was the undisputed bedrock of global commerce. Yet, within a mere 100 years, the empire had declared bankruptcy a staggering 4 times, its once formidable power diminished to that of a secondary state, a position from which it would never regain its former imperial ascendancy. Fast forward to 1914, and the British Empire stood as an unparalleled colossus, the largest dominion ever forged in human history. The Union Jack proudly fluttered over territories on every inhabited continent, and the pound sterling reigned supreme as the undisputed currency of international trade. A mere 4 decades later, this vast empire had completely disintegrated. Its once mighty currency had imploded, and Britain itself had been relegated to a subordinate ally of the very Americans it had once governed. By 1991, the Soviet Union, a formidable nuclear superpower, projected its influence across the globe, boasting an impressive arsenal of nuclear weapons, satellites traversing the heavens, and a network of client states spanning 3 continents. Yet, in under 3 short years, it simply evaporated. Not through military conquest, but rather meticulously dismantled by the unforgiving mathematics of economics.